Hi. So before we begin, I would like to point out something that I have to unfortunately point out in a lot of my videos for some reason. Bear with me a second. This is a new setup and everything, so it's going to take me a little bit to kind of get used to it. But anyway, I would like to point out that in this video, while everything I say is pretty much based on explicit canon that you can find yourself throughout the game, it does have my own interpretations of what these canon things mean, and what they mean to me. They don't have to, you can disagree. You're allowed to. The only thing I ask is that you just refrain from being a jerk in the comments section. I'm trying to create a nice place of discussion. If you find that I said something wrong, or if you just disagree with me, please just be kind about it. Don't just go harassing me or other people in the comments just because you don't agree with something that they said. Okay? So to start off, I want to make some observations just based on how the lords all sit together. When we see them first in the meeting, in the chapel, I believe it is, whenever we see them first there, they are all sitting in a particular way that is really interesting to me the more I kind of like look at it. So based on this picture, and the lords' placements, as well as what we know of them from Miranda's journals you can find toward the end of the game, we can make a few assumptions, right? So most often, a lot of people assume that Lady Dimitrescu is actually Miranda's favorite, and in terms of being a vessel for Eva, she was the most favorable, if she didn't have the blood disease, which was, I think it was hemophilia. If she didn't have that, she probably would have been the vessel for Eva. That being said, Heisenberg and Lady Beneviento were also very favorable to be vessels. So I don't know. It's that we'll get into that later. So because Donna, I'll just call her Donna, it's easier than saying the whole Lady Beneviento. Because Donna sat directly next to Miranda in this meeting and in the chapel, it can actually be assumed that she is the favorite of Miranda. Like she's the favorite. She's the youngest. She's the favorite. It makes sense. So if we continue to look at it, we can see that Lady Dimitrescu is also next to Donna. A little bit farther away from Miranda, but she is seated right next to her. And then across from them sit Moreau and Heisenberg. I do really enjoy the interpretation among the fandom that Moreau just kind of placed himself there, to be closer to Miranda, because of his admiration for her, and she just kind of allowed it just to get him to stop complaining about it. Sometimes they can be silly, sometimes I like those little lighthearted moments with the fandom. Now, I know that canonically, she treats the lords pretty much the same, both in terms of how she acts with them, and her gifts to them to keep them under her. This is mentioned a lot in a lot of the lords when they're kind of speaking. It can be mentioned in their notes. And in particular, it's mentioned in one of Lady Dimitrescu's entries, where she laments how she is treated as a sister to the others, and how, despite what Miranda had told her, and what she's been gifted throughout her years of her lordship and whatnot, she's not treated like she's a favorite. She's treated just the same as the rest of them. She's on the same standing, and she doesn't like that. So I'm unsure how canon this, like, the Mercenaries minigame actually is that you can find within the game. But there is a moment whenever you're playing as Lady Dimitrescu and you are facing Miranda in like a final boss battle. She asked, why am I treated the same as them? Why do you treat me the same as them? I think is actually what she specifically says. Given what we know of the lords, which of course is very little, considering Capcom's full of cowards and they didn't want to give us any more lore, it's safe to assume that because Donna mostly keeps to herself, and she, as far as we know, follows Miranda's word very well, her obedience would be rewarded, just like we see with Lady Dimitrescu, and I believe Moreau as well, and probably also Heisenberg. So while we're exploring the Beneviento estate, we come across a few notes from the gardener, and within them we discover that Donna is ecstatic to be considered Miranda's adopted daughter. Remember, this is canon. These are the notes, right? She is the youngest of the lords as far as we can tell, and honestly, I feel like Capcom really wasted her potential in terms of her abilities and like what Miranda gifted her, in terms of the Cadeau. And I know that I say that a lot on my channel, and I've talked about it extensively almost in every single video, how much the lords were wasted, how much their potential was wasted. And I mean it, but this is not the purpose of this video. So this is my own interpretation of it, but we can also think of the Lord's abilities as like a hierarchy of sorts for Miranda's favoritism. Donna had the potential to be incredibly powerful and could have easily defeated Ethan had it not been for a combination of things that I really just don't want to get into right now. Regardless, some of their abilities do overlap when you really think about it. Donna could technically be considered psychic, with her ability to induce hallucinations through the pollen of her plants, while Miranda herself is psychic, in the sense that she can induce illusions, like we see in the Shadows of Rose DLC. She didn't really have a lot of other, like, screen time to really see the extent of her abilities. Both of them, both Donna and Miranda, didn't really have a lot of screen time to really see how far these abilities go. But I hope you get my point. I hope you get what I'm saying. Anyway, Miranda's abilities do overlap a lot with the Lord's as well. Like how Lady Dimitrescu's rapid regeneration, the ability to summon, like, lichens, like Heisenberg. And I looked at her wiki and I tried to remember what all, like, abilities that she had, as well as what Moreau had. And she didn't really have a lot in common. So we'll get into that. So, like I said earlier, a lot of people do assume that Lady Dimitrescu was Miranda's favorite because she was gifted a castle and 3 daughters for being a lord and for continuing her obedience under Miranda, right? However, I do have a rebuttal for this. Like I said, there have been several instances throughout the canon game where Lady Dimitrescu remarks how she's treated the same as her siblings, the other lords, despite the numerous gifts that she's been given from Miranda over the years. And, in my opinion, if she truly was Miranda's favorite, wouldn't she have gotten something more out of her leader? Like, wouldn't she be treated better? Wouldn't she literally be treated as if she was a favorite? In my own interpretations of the game, despite how often I contradict myself in other writings, on a certain site that I just don't want to bring up right now, I don't think Miranda really cares about any of the lords, beyond what they can do for her. That's not to say that she doesn't, like, tolerate some of them more than others, like, Donna, but I don't think that she actually cares about them at all, aside from, like, what they can do for her and what uses they have for her, We have to remember the kind of person Miranda is when we're, like, talking about stuff like this, and how selfish that she's actually been throughout her century she's been alive, and the century that she's been searching for Eva. She's not a good person, and while I think that she could be capable of care, I also think that she's been manipulated by the Megamycete for so long, for over a century now, that she has literally just lost all her humanity. Her only focus is on finding Eva, on bringing her back. Who cares what happens to everybody else if I can get my daughter back, I'll touch more on that later, but, all that to say that she has been actively manipulating the lords into doing her bidding, and that means she doesn't care about them, right? She can play the caring priestess of the village all she wants, but she only has her daughter on her mind, right? As we can tell, and pretty much a lot of her voice lines, they point back to Eva in some way. And she'll stop at nothing to get Eva back, as we can tell, considering all the lore around her, everything that she's done over the past century just to get Eva back. Homegirl will stop at nothing. But back onto the topic of her not caring, she willingly had Ethan kill the lords, because she thought that in doing so, in this little sacrifice in the ritual, it would bring Eva back. And it does not seem very caring, does it? To claim that you really love, you care about someone, you care about their well-being, whatever, to say that to their face, and then you're gonna be like, hey, dude, random stranger, I know I just stole your daughter, but I'm gonna lead you to come kill my kids for me. Okay? Okay. I don't know. Maybe I just view it differently. It's my own, it's just my interpretation of it. Now, I do think that Lady Dimitrescu and Heisenberg are, like, kind of in the same standing in Miranda's eyes. Like, they're both in second place, if that makes sense. On some days, I'm sure that she does tolerate Heisenberg more than she does Lady Dimitrescu, and vice versa. There are days that I'm sure she tolerates Lady Dimitrescu more than Heisenberg. But also, there are the days, like we saw in the meeting, where I'm sure that she wishes they would just leave her alone. If you ever looked, like, close up on Miranda's model, whenever they're having this argument, she, like, literally rolls her eyes when they're just, like, bickering back and forth. She's like, no, okay, I'm smiling because it's funny. She's not smiling. She does not find this funny. She's really irritated. Which, granted, I get it. Never mind. I'm getting off topic. Never mind. We do know that she does favor Heisenberg in some way, but again, I don't really think that it's more than, like, how she favors Donna. You know what I mean? When we look at the way Heisenberg talks about her, in his own dialogue and in his notes and everything, we see his resentment for the way that he was treated after she took him to be a vessel for Eva, right? And even in his notes, we can tell that she treated him as a son and, part of her family. You know, in a way, considering that he says that she doesn't know the difference between family and experiment, you know, despite what she had done to him, she still treats him or calls him like her son, you know, because of his affinity for the Cadeau, and how well his body reacted to it, she kept him under her and she treated him, I guess, well enough. He survived, I guess. I'm gonna be so honest. We really should have gotten a DLC on, like, instead of I loved Shadows of Rose. I liked Shadows of Rose, but I do think that we should have gotten a DLC on what life was like in the village prior to the events of the game. You know, but again, Capcom is full of cowards, and I'm not afraid to say it. I am sick of this. Give us what we want, Capcom. What was life like? Do you even know? Have you thought about this? I don't think so. But again, in my own interpretation of these events, I think Miranda did definitely, she knew of his plans to eventually get rid of her. You know, she's very powerful. She likely could have just squashed him if she actually saw him as a threat. But I think that she kept him around not only because of his affinity and, you know, what she could learn from his experiment too, but also because of his own research on the villagers and how she could use his research to her advantage to continue trying to find a vessel for Eva. This is a brief interlude to say that I know me saying all this kind of makes it seem like I don't like Miranda and I think she's awful. I do think she's a horrible person, actually, and I don't think any of her actions can actually be redeemed. But on that same note, I think she's a wonderfully written villain, and she should have had more screen time. She's the main villain of the game, and she had like 10 minutes of screen time. Now you may return to your program. I'm pretty sure, like, you guys can see the trend with Miranda about keeping the lords under her in some way of trying to make sure that they stay under her. They all had the potential to be greater than what she allowed them to be. Every single one of them did. They had the potential to rise up against her, you know? But I also know that Miranda is a literal genius. She's been alive for over a century. It would be damning if she wasn't, like, incredibly intelligent at this point. But she knew that, you know, she had to keep the lords hostile with one another so that they didn't rise up against her. If she kept up with the animosity between them, like pitting them against each other, treating them all the exact same despite her gifts, or despite what she might tell them personally, you know, she might tell them, you are definitely my favorite. I love you more than I love them. And then she'll immediately turn right back around and be like, actually, you're going to be treated the exact same way as the rest of them, despite me telling you previously that you were better. But anyway, because of all that, I think that her actions have caused them to never really think to work together to rise up against her, and then she could continue her reign in the village until she found Rose again, right? I feel like I'm thinking too hard about this. And honestly, sometimes in my videos, I feel like I give Capcom more credit than they deserve when I think about things like this, because I don't know that they even had that in mind. I don't even know if they thought, like, yeah, Miranda definitely pitted them against each other intentionally, and not just because of whatever. It was not convenience. No, she definitely did it. I don't think they thought about that. The more I talk about this, and the more I think about it, the more I'm like, I don't think you guys thought about this. I think I'm filling in the blanks for you. So I don't know how true this is for Donna, because, you know, she was the newer lord and to this day remains a complete mystery for some stupid reason. But the other three lords all conducted their own experiments on the villagers with the Cadeau to see its effects, right? I know Donna tested her abilities on, like, her workers, like the gardener, and placed her Cadeau into her dolls. You know, she sliced it up and put them in there to be able to control them from a distance. But I don't really currently remember her, like, anything about her doing experiments on the same level as the other lords. You know, we know that Lady Dimitrescu took people from the village and she made the Moroica and the Samka, right? Heisenberg made the Soldats. And then, well, I think he also might have made lichens unintentionally. Yeah, I don't remember. We know Moreau, though, did make lichens, and I believe he made the Varcolac as well. I don't believe that Donna did experiments on this same level as them. I don't think that she took people from the village to experiment on. She's a recluse. She's a hermit. It's natural. I get it. So that being said, I don't think she did. I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think she did. But because Donna doesn't really cause any problems for Miranda, you know, because she keeps to herself and she stays in her estate, what isn't to like about her as someone who wants to just keep, like, people underneath her? You know, to Miranda, what isn't to like about Donna? What isn't to, like, have her be the favorite for. But we can also assume that Miranda continued to have the lords around because she didn't have to get her hands dirty with them either. You know, she could just run off and do whatever bioterrorism she felt like doing that day, and then come back with a clean slate in her village and pretend like nothing happened. Because she didn't get her hands dirty. She could just go be a bioterrorist elsewhere, and then the lords would just take care of all the dirty business for her. It's a master plan, really. In all honesty, though, this is just my thought as I'm, reading my notes and everything. Why couldn't she have just taken Rose in the night and then just gone back to the village so that no one would have followed her? I mean, granted, Chris probably would have followed her, but like, what was with the deception of pretending to be Mia for like what, 3 days? What was with the waiting? Why did she wait so long? Am I just missing something, or was this in like an actual plot hole? Because I've actually thought about this before. I get that it's probably just for plot convenience, and like the writing in Village can be really, really weak at times. Am I missing something? Am I missing something? I feel like I'm missing something because I just can't think of why she waited so long. Anyway, so now we get to talk about Moreau and how I think that he was the least favorite lord, mostly due to his low affinity to the Cadeau. We know that in Miranda's notes in her little lab, his affinity was almost laughingly low, and it caused a lot of other problems with him after it was implanted in his head, right? No, not his head. His pause. It was implanted into the back of his neck. Okay, so I was like, it's not really his head, it was like back here somewhere. Okay, never mind. Continuing. Anyway, after the Cadeau was implanted into the back of his neck, it caused a lot of other issues within him. Not only did it alter the way that his internal organs worked so that he could mutate, or he would mutate uncontrollably into a giant, fish-like monstrosity, but the implication in Miranda's notes is that the parasite itself caused a bit of brain damage in a way. And because he has the lowest affinity and the lowest control over his mutation, I think it would be safe to assume that he is her least favorite. He's likely the one that she has to worry about the most because, again, he can't control his mutation and he has lower brain functions, like canonically. We've seen the way he acts. Listen, I do like Moreau. Don't get me wrong. I really do feel bad for him. He got the short end of the stick really bad. Okay, so I know that my ramblings don't always make a lot of sense because I have ADHD and I tend to just kind of go off track, right? It's great. It happens all the time. So let's recap this section of the video ever so briefly before I move on to the next one. So first things first, it is very likely that Donna is Miranda's favorite lord simply because she's quiet, she keeps to herself in her estate, and she doesn't really cause a lot of trouble and doesn't really argue outside of like Angie. They share similar abilities, and Donna sits closest to Miranda during their meetings with the lords, which to me implies the favoritism. 2. Lady Dimitrescu and Heisenberg are likely on equal standing in Miranda's eyes due to their high affinities for the Cadeau and how they both could have become vessels for Eva had it not been for the issues that presented post-experimentation, like the blood disease in Lady Dimitrescu and then the electric organs in Heisenberg. 3. Moreau, because of his experiment and how horribly it went for him, all things considered, is most likely Miranda's least favorite of the lords. I believe that he causes a lot of problems for her, both with his experiment and his mutation and his failing experiments. And because of that, she ranks him much lower on the totem pole of the lords, but she kind of has to keep him around as he is still powerful, and he does have ties with the original founders in the village. And then number 4, Miranda most likely keeps the lords around because not only would she then not have to dirty her hands and not have to pay much attention to the village, she can just go do her little experiments all she wants. The lords conduct their own experiments with the Godot on the villagers. So then now she can study their notes on, what they've found and then how she can change future experiments to create the perfect vessel. The conditions, how the person. I talk a lot about in one of my works how the Cadeau's affinity to somebody and the mold as well is based on their personality, and kind of them as a person, I guess, if that makes sense. If we were to base Miranda's favoritism solely off of each lord's affinity to the Godot, the list would go from Lady Dimitrescu, Heisenberg, Donna, and then to Moreau. Sorry, Fishman. But as we are talking about this in terms of how she treats the lords individually and kind of also as a whole, that list is just not the case. It's, most likely Donna, Lady Dimitrescu, and Heisenberg, depending on the day, and then Moreau. So we can now move on to my least favorite part to talk about. Not because I don't like to. I actually really like this because I'm a bit of a pot stirrer. But because this is the part where I tend to get a lot of rude comments when I'm simply stating lore and then my interpretations of said lore. So to me, one of the most interesting parts of like Village as a whole, as a game, is how it can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, right? I know that there are religious undertones within the game, and the village itself is, a cult of some kind. I'm aware that higher religious figures, especially like in Christianity and Catholicism, they are often considered like they have like more parental names like father. I think sister, brother are used a little bit too. Those things are used in religious groups, right? However, when it comes to talking about the lords and their relationships with each other and also Miranda, I don't think that is the case. I don't think it is fully, I'm just referring to you as like sister or brother, whatever, because of a religious thing or religious or cultish thing. We see multiple times throughout the game where one of the lords will refer to the others as their sibling, like direct the sibling, or one of the lords will refer to Miranda as their mother. Now, like in a different context, I can see how one would assume that the lords don't have a familial relationship with each other, right? If we were just taking phrases out of context and we weren't thinking about the game as a whole, I get it. Like I can see that, right? We have to remember that the context of these characters as well, when we look at their notes and what they might mean. When Lady Dimitrescu is talking about the meeting Ethan escaped from, she mentions the other lords as family in quotations and goes on to say, to think I'm treated like a sister to those miscreants. We have to remember her status and how she grew up. Personally, I don't see this as Lady Dimitrescu saying that they're not a family of some kind. Knowing what I do about her, I see this as her being upset that, even with her noble upbringing, she's treated the same as someone who in the past likely would have been like lesser than her, which is emphasis on the quotation marks. I just don't know what else to really use in this context. I know that there is a class difference between Lady Dimitrescu and Heisenberg, who she despises, like outwardly hates. She thinks herself above the other lords because of how Miranda has treated her in the past, and then she also loathes the fact that Miranda continues to treat her the same despite what she thinks is their closer relationship. And then, of course, as we've discussed, Miranda really isn't close with any of them. They're just pawns in her game. They're a means to an end and nothing more. But these contradictions, they upset Lady Dimitrescu, as we see in her notes. And again, she refers to Miranda as mother. I could see this as being a religious title if it wasn't for the other evidence within these very same notes hinting that Miranda herself treats the lords as if they are family and are siblings. And so it also, the one thing that I've noticed while I'm going back through all the notes and everything is that a lot of the villagers, as far as I can remember, tend to refer to Miranda as Mother Miranda, right? That the religious title lies in saying her full name, not just mother. We see it especially, I think, in the gardener's notes, when he's talking about, Lady Benevento has officially become Mother Miranda's adopted daughter. Whereas the lords, either I think it's Heisenberg refers to her as Miranda, and then Lady Dimitrescu refers to her as mother. So does Moreau. Lady Madonna doesn't really have any, as far as I can remember. I'll maybe get back to that or correct me if I'm wrong. And while I'm rambling, I would like to bring up a parallel that I noticed a while back. We can watch moments where Lady Dimitrescu is a little stricter, on her daughters, perhaps because of the situation they're in, or just because of their nobility and, they're her daughters, right? We see this especially in a certain line after Cassandra, I think, is the last daughter alive, and then you can kind of sneak in and have, listen to this conversation that they're having in the foyer. Lady Dimitrescu says, "You're my daughter, now act like it." This can very easily be interpreted as her saying, "You're a Dimitrescu, don't disappoint me," or the name. And then when Lady Dimitrescu speaks to Miranda on the phone before she has that iconic scene where she throws the vanity, we hear her tell Miranda that she won't let her down, which again is really just another way of saying that she won't disappoint Miranda. Now, she does, of course, disappoint Miranda in her own way, because she decides that saving her daughters when Miranda obviously isn't going to is way more important to her than obeying someone who has made it very obvious that she doesn't care. So psychologically speaking, and this is something that I have struggled with a lot too, and I've noticed that a lot of other people in my life have struggled with, a lot of people have a fear of disappointing their parents or just people that they're close to in general. When I remember both of these scenes together, when I'm thinking about them like as a parallel, it makes me wonder if Lady Dimitrescu's conversation with Cassandra might have stemmed from something Miranda said to her about disappointing her and then the fear that that caused, right? After all, again, we don't know what really went on in the village outside of what we see during the game, which is already a catastrophe. It's already this tragedy. People are dying. We don't get to see their daily life. By the time Ethan gets there, they're all dying or they're dead. We don't know what it was like before. So even during like the events of the village, we don't really know what's going on. We don't know what went on prior to the events of the game, and the things that we do know, it's just not enough. But it's something to think about. So let's move on to the brief section of Lady Beneviento's gardener's notes, right? I've seen the rebuttal a lot that just because it's the gardener speaking on Donna's behalf in the notes, and it's his point of view of the events, that we can't know for certain if she actually is considered Miranda's adopted daughter or not. But I also don't think that Capcom would have put that in there for no reason, considering all the other hints and the evidence that the Lords are Miranda's children in a really fucked up way. Listen, I know that I often give Capcom too much credit, and I give them credit where they don't deserve it. But I also know that they can be incredibly detail-oriented at times, and with all the other evidence stacked up against, this particular interpretation, I don't think that that was an accident. So it is directly stated by the gardener that Donna has become Miranda's adopted daughter. I really don't think there's much, interpretation left in that. I don't think it's open to interpretation. I think it's just straightforward. It could be a fib by Miranda to further Donna's attachment to her because, the poor lady lost her parents at a very young age. I don't think that that's the full truth. I don't think that Miranda's incapable of lying, obviously. But also, I don't think that in this instance, that was a lie. I don't believe that to be a lie. So within my own interpretation of it, when Donna became a lord and then had the Cadeau implanted in her, Miranda did consider her a daughter of some kind. It feels obvious, but considering how she was trying her best to create these vessels for Eva, for her daughter, it makes sense that, at least to me, that she would then consider them, even though they're failed, she would consider them her children because, a lot of work went into creating them. I don't know if this is making any sense. I really hope it is, but I don't know if it is. I do really wish that we could, have more full-length conversations about Donna, but we don't know shit about her, right? We don't know anything. We might one day, but I'm not holding out hope for that, to be honest with you. Now let's talk about Moreau. This should be obvious, right? But we'll talk about it anyway. So of the lords, I think that Moreau is the most vocal about the familial relationship that he has with Miranda and sometimes the other lords. Like Lady Dimitrescu, he calls her mother, but he also uses phrases such as mama and ma. He calls out to her when he's mutated, wonders why she doesn't love him. He begs her to help him in his final moments, like a child calling out to its mother. And again, we see the I'll make you proud, the, I won't let you down. I'm catching a lot of parallels here. Considering Moreau is the most vocal about his admiration for his mother, Miranda, and how some of his lines could be similar to Lady Dimitrescu's in terms of tone and wording, I think it is safe to assume that the lords do see her as a mother figure, and not just one in a religious sense. They, especially considering the difference in how the villagers just call her Mother Miranda, which title, name, they just call her mother. And in the context of she treats me like I'm their sibling, she treats me like we're a family. Now, while we're on the topic of Moreau, and we've reached the last of his notes, I would like to bring up another argument that I've seen multiple times throughout the years. We see Moreau mention that he knows he's not Miranda's real child, and he worries that she'll abandon him when she finally brings Eva back. The term true children, to me at least, is not meant to represent the fact that the lords aren't familial with one another. It's meant to state that while Miranda does see the lords as her children, they're not Eva, and they never will be, right? They were just meant to be vessels for her. They're not her. They're not her daughter who she's been searching for a century. Eva is her true child, and none of the other lords will ever compare to her. And the way that, I interpreted when I'm thinking about it It's like a really, really messed up way to refer to someone as like your adopted kid. You're not my true child. I didn't give birth to you, but you're still my kid. Like it's weird. It's weird. And now for the finale, we can talk about Heisenberg. He is also very vocal in his section in the game about Miranda taking the lords to be her children. He outright states it to Ethan. He calls the other lords his siblings and says Miranda doesn't think that them, like as a whole, are anything but children. And like I said before, he does say that she can't see the difference between experiment and family, but I don't think that changes the fact that she does see them as like her children and treats them as such, again, in a really weird way. And then throughout like all the notes from the lords and their own grievances with their like family, they all use the same or at least similar terms when referring to each other as siblings or to Miranda as a mother figure. Like Lady Dimitrescu, she mentions, to think that I am treated like a sister to them, not like a. In the context, it does not seem religious. In the context, it seems like literally like Miranda treats her like a daughter and treats all the lords like they're just like siblings with each other. Again, I know that there are religious undertones in the game, and I know the titles father, mother, sister, brother. I know. However, all of this, with all the notes and even what we hear from the characters themselves, it doesn't seem to point to them just being like a cult or religious family. It's my own interpretation, right? But I think all of this evidence points more towards an actual family rather than one solely derived from a cult or a religion. Now, I will say that I also accept the interpretation from anybody that it's kind of like both, because like it is. I don't see it as necessarily being fully one way or the other, but rather it's kind of like somewhere in the middle, and sometimes it kind of shifts this way and sometimes it kind of shifts that way. The characters themselves, while they do refer to each other like as siblings, they all seem to have complicated feelings on the matter that are like never really explored. And then as it's turning out, we'll probably never actually know. But hey, that's the fun of media, I suppose. Now, if you have any other interpretations and you wish to share them, feel free to do so kindly in my comments. Keep it civil, please. Listen, I don't have the energy to just dig through comments, right? And, delete all the rude ones. But I will, if it means keeping the comment section a place of discussion rather than like one of hostility. And also, like I said before, I do love Miranda as a villain, and her motives alone hurt me to my core. It's something that I focus a lot on, like when I'm writing about her in any capacity. But at the end of the day, she doesn't care about them. She doesn't care about the lords. It's in the subtext. It's the way that she disposes of them so easily, despite their many years together. It's how she continued to use them and manipulate them for her own gain. How she mistreated them, and it's blatantly stated by Heisenberg. It's possible that like towards the beginning of their experiments, and maybe not with Donna, but towards the beginning of Lady Dimitrescu's experiments, I think she was in the 1940s. I think it was in the Second World War. I think that was the 1940s. Maybe she cared about them in some capacity. I don't know. We don't know. That's really like the one thing that I hate about Village is how much we don't know. I don't like all this stuff being left to interpretation because you could have just said it. You could have just literally just said it. Could have given us more. And now we're finally onto one of my also favorite topics when it comes to Miranda. I'm a firm believer that the Megamycete itself is conscious in some way, and it has changed Miranda and molded her into someone that she no longer recognizes. She's not the same person that she was a century ago, and she's been so blinded by her need to find Eva that she has completely disregarded the lives of others around her. It's really tragic, and it hurts so good. I love a good tragic tale. If you can't tell, if you've ever read any of my writing, you know. But I think that's all I have. While Miranda does see the lords as her children in a really weird way, she also doesn't care about them. Not outside of, like, what they can do for her and what she can use from them, I love her, but she really does need to, like, she needs to you need to check on your kids, lady. They're, your grandchildren, the Dimitrescu daughters are killing people. They're cannibalizing people, and you're just like, oh well, I guess I just need to go off and commit bioterrorism. Anyways, I want to thank everybody for your continued support and your patience. I know that I disappeared for a really long time, and I won't promise that I'm going to continue to be back. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this new way to record these videos. I know that I ramble a lot, But I want to continue making videos and talking about this game however I can, especially with the ninth installment coming out soon. But I cannot say for certain that I will be returning or that I will keep returning. You know, there will probably be a day where I just don't come back, which is it'll be sad. But this was alone a lot of fun, and I had a lot of fun researching everything and looking into everything. But, you know, maybe the new game will bring me back into this world. We'll see. Once again, thank you all so much for your support and for watching until the end. If you've made it this far, I appreciate each and every one of you, and I appreciate that you have stuck around this long. If you're new, hi, welcome. There used to be a lot more discussion around here. It has not happened in a really long time. If you want to check the description below, you can see the other links to my other social medias that I use like a lot more often. But anyway, hope you're all having a wonderful day and take care of yourselves. Hopefully, I will see you next time. Bye bye.